New tonight, the Trump administration is increasing pressure on Venezuela and its leader, Nicolas Maduro. President Trump saying on social media airlines should consider the airspace over the country closed in its entirety. Trump this week designated Maduro and his allies as members of a foreign terrorist organization and also suggested that land strikes could be imminent. CNN contributor Stefano Pozzebon is joining us now from Caracas. Stefano, how is the Venezuelan government reacting to this post today from the U.S. president?
Well, Jessica, we haven't heard directly from Nicolas Maduro, and that is quite telling me. Let me tell you that. Before we do a little bit of analysis, we do have, however, a statement from the Venezuelan government saying, in the words of their defense minister, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, that no external power has any faculty to interfere, block, or move any decision on the sovereignty of Venezuela. So total rejection from those words from Donald Trump, who early on Saturday had said that he had a message to airlines and pilots to consider the airspace over Venezuela closed, and that seemed to pave the way to some form of direct intervention here in Venezuela. As I was telling you, Jessica, it's telling that we haven't heard directly from Nicolas Maduro today on Saturday, nor we have seen him yesterday on Friday. On Thursday, Maduro gave a speech to the troops, but that was a video message from an undisclosed location. At this point, the last time anyone saw Nicolas Maduro out in the streets of Caracas was only on Wednesday this past week. And that is 4 days that we haven't seen him as of late of tonight. And that, of course, is leading the way of a lot of speculation of where exactly is Nicolas Maduro. Is he perhaps hunkering down, perhaps in one of the bunkers that we know the Venezuelan government has at their disposal in preparation for some form of eventual direct attack on Venezuelan soil? Or perhaps he is still trying to channel messages to Donald Trump and telling him to sit down and have a negotiations. I don't know if you saw it, but over the last week, several outlets have reported that indeed Trump and Maduro himself did speak earlier last week, Jessica. We haven't been able to bring that, to confirm that, but we will definitely bring that to you as soon as we hear it from either Caracas or up there in Washington. But right now, Venezuela is approaching this weekend with a bit of a mix between apprehension and expectation. Of course, there is a lot of apprehension because the risks of something going wrong and opening up to an open conflict are very, very tangible. Jessica.
All right, Stefano Pozzebon there in Caracas for us. Thank you so much for your reporting. We are also learning new details about a deadly U.S. strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. Sources telling CNN that the boat was initially disabled when it was first hit on September 2nd. But sources say when officials noticed they were survivors, they carried out a second strike, killing everyone on board. CNN's Betsy Klein has more on this. Betsy?
Well, we are learning that the U.S. military carried out a second follow-up strike on a suspected drug vessel operating in the Caribbean on September 2nd after the first strike did not kill everyone on board. Sources familiar with the matter telling our colleague Natasha Bertrand that when the initial strike appeared to disable that boat and cause deaths, the military assessed that there were survivors. The second attack killed the remaining crew, 11 people died, and the ship sunk. Now, one of the sources says that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had ordered the military before this operation to ensure the strike killed everyone aboard the boat. It is not clear at this time if he knew there were survivors before that second strike. But President Trump announced the strike and the death toll on the day of the attacks, again, September 2nd. But the Trump administration has never publicly acknowledged killing survivors. This was the first strike on an alleged drug vessel in the Caribbean. There have since been about 20 known strikes in the Caribbean and one in the Eastern Pacific. We should note these details were first reported by The Intercept and The Washington Post. All of this comes as the president continues to weigh his options in Venezuela, suggesting yesterday that action on land could start very soon after weeks of threats. And there has been a major show of force in the region as the U.S. has amassed significant resources. That includes the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, roughly 15,000 military personnel, more than a dozen warships, and 10 F-35 fighter jets. Trump has been briefed by his team on a really wide range of options, including airstrikes on military or government facilities and drug trafficking routes, or a more direct attempt to oust the country's president, Nicolas Maduro. Betsy Klein, CNN, Washington.
Betsy, thank you so much. And we are joined now by former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral James Stavridis. He also served more than 3 years as the head of U.S. Southern Command and is now vice chairman of the investment firm, the Carlyle Group. Good to see you on this Saturday. Thanks for being here. We have talked, you and I, before about these strikes, and you have made the point that intelligence could be gathered if these boats were intercepted instead of immediately blown up. What do you take away from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth's defense, that these are intended to be lethal strikes, that that's what they think is, in their mind, the biggest point of all of this?
Even if these are intended to be lethal strikes, once you conduct that first strike and now your enemies are knocked out of action, think of a pilot parachuting down after an aircraft is shot down. Think of a soldier on the ground who's knocked unconscious by a concussion. Think in this case of a couple of alleged drug runners now floating around in the water. To go in and kill them at that point deliberately, if all that is factually correct, is very troubling in two ways. One, the laws of war are such that when an opponent is knocked out like that, it's incumbent upon you to capture them. And then secondly, the point you made a moment ago, Jessica, and the one you and I have talked about repeatedly, why not capture them and get the intelligence, interrogate them, and, oh, by the way, prosecute them for the crime of drug running. But you lose that intelligence. Final thought here, I saw a statement from the Senate Armed Services Committee, which is the senior committee in Congress that oversees the armed forces, joint bipartisan statement from the co-chairs, Senator Roger Wicker and Senator Jack Reed, both of them veterans. Jack Reed, an Army officer, former West Point graduate. The Senator Wicker is a former JAG officer in the United States Air Force. They intend to conduct vigorous oversight. I suspect they'll be looking at this one closely.
And so as all of these strikes are happening, we do look to Venezuela as well. Trump, the president, saying that airlines should consider the airspace over Venezuela closed. Last Saturday, major airlines canceled flights from Venezuela after an FAA warning. What do you think we should read into this?
We should read into it that strikes are very probably going to occur over the course of this week. If you think back to the Middle East, you and I were discussing that a few months ago. The airspace over Israel and parts of the Middle East was repeatedly closed, not only by the sovereign states there, but also from warnings from the U.S. and other entities. Same situation here. The fact that the president is, in my view, in this case, if he's going to launch airstrikes, I think it's a responsibility on the part of the U.S. to let commercial aircraft, Venezuelan aircraft, know that strikes are coming. So these could be Tomahawk missiles, these could be drones, these could be Marine helicopters bringing Marines ashore. All of that creates a lot of complications in the skies over Venezuela. So when you hear the president of the United States throw that warning out there, to me, it sounds like strikes are coming probably sooner rather than later.
And you went through some of the things you think it could be, but let's talk a little bit about that in more detail. I mean, what should we, if that does happen, what do you think is smart to anticipate?
Let's start with a set of options that were probably presented to the president. They run from going after drug labs ashore, but using unmanned aircraft. Again, Tomahawk missiles, drones to go after them. Next level up would be to go after transportation hubs, again, using drones and Tomahawks, but then perhaps adding, Jessica, strike fighter aircraft like those Joint Strike Fighters you showed a moment ago, or the 80 combat aircraft that are on the USS Gerald R. Ford. Next up would be going after leadership targets, Venezuelan military targets, their air defenses, their small Navy. They have about 30 ships or so. Their small Air Force, about 40 aircraft. You could take those out. And then at the very high end of the risk spectrum would be actually putting U.S. Marines ashore, presumably to go after these drug sites, go after the targets I mentioned, military ones, perhaps go after, track down, find, capture Maduro. Those are all options. They all have different levels of risk. I suspect the president is wrestling with all of those. A final thought here, land operations, boots on the ground, very dangerous, not a good idea in my view, because of the complications, the size of Venezuela, twice the size of California. If the president is intent upon escalation here, I think he'll probably end up with the kind of airstrikes I talked about a moment ago.